President Trump is already facing some big legal hurdles less than 24 hours after declaring a national emergency along the southern border. 3 lawsuits have already been filed, including one by El Paso County, Texas, and 2 others by government watchdog groups. One of those suits includes 3 Texas landowners who are worried the wall will be built on their land. As CNN's Ed Lavendera reports, they aren't the only ones with concerns over eminent domain.
Along a quiet stretch of the Rio Grande in South Texas, there's a place that's just home to butterflies, hundreds of different species. And Mariana Wright has spent the last 2 years fighting to keep President Trump's border wall from cutting through the 100 acres of the National Butterfly Center in Mission, Texas.
Here, Sylvia, where they just came and put all these stakes out. They'll be starting on this federal piece of land.
Last year, Congress approved the construction of 33 miles of new border barrier in the Rio Grande Valley, and construction is about to begin in the coming weeks. Part of the wall was supposed to cut right through the Butterfly Center, leaving some of the property south of the border wall and some north. The government used eminent domain to seize the necessary land to build the wall, much to the dismay of the center's executive director.
They're seizing the land of tax-paying citizens and pushing the boundaries of Mexico north of the Rio Grande River, something General Santa Anna was never able to do. Trump is making America smaller, not greater.
But the congressional spending bill offered a last-minute reprieve to the Butterfly Center and 4 other specific locations. For now, no border wall in the Butterfly Center. But wall will come right up to their property lines and leave a quarter-mile stretch of the center's property wide open. But Butterfly Center officials say they're worried the Trump administration will use the national emergency declaration to keep trying to close the gap. And they're worried about what it's doing to the other landowners who haven't been spared.
This is a shame. This is a national disgrace. And the idea that it's going to happen and produce none of the purported benefit. I mean, that's like going and buying a new car and driving it into a building. Why would you do that?
The Butterfly Center's legal battles paint a poignant picture of what lies ahead. The congressional spending bill compromise allocates nearly $1.4 billion to construct another 55 miles of border barrier in various locations in the Rio Grande Valley.
We've got to get rid of drugs and gangs and people. It's an invasion. We have an invasion of drugs and criminals coming into our country that we stop, but it's very hard to stop. With a wall, it would be very easy.
Much of this new construction will be on private property, which means the federal government will likely have to sue landowners to acquire the land. Down the road from the National Butterfly Center, Fred Cavazos and his family are still trying to stop the construction of the looming barrier.
And we've had this property for all our lives.
Cavazos and his family own 70 acres that will be left south of the border barrier in a no man's land. They've been tied up in eminent domain litigation, but are losing hope they'll stop the wall from being built starting in the next few weeks. So you're running out of time.
Yes. What can you do? You can't fight the government. We'll try. We'll try to stop them and stall a little, but we can stop the government. They'll do what they want to do.
So the Rio Grande Valley braces for what most residents here say is the unwelcome wall. Ed Lavendera, CNN, Mission, Texas.
And for more on the growing list of legal obstacles, let's bring in Steve Vladek, a law professor at the University of Texas. Steve, good to see you. So this fight over eminent domain, expected to be a pretty big hurdle in court. So do the people who are trying to protect their land really even stand a chance? You heard the last gentleman who was like, fighting the government, well, that's pretty hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Frederica, in the context of eminent domain cases, the litigation would boil down to whether the government has a justifiable public use for taking these people's land. I think for everything we might feel, for everything we might think about the border, about the wall, about the national emergency, I think the government's going to be on slightly stronger footing, arguing that there's a public use justifying, the taking of the land in this context, as opposed to those places where, well, because I think if the building a border wall, I think, does have at least some public use from the perspective of, the national security implications, from the perspective of making it harder for those attempting to enter the United States to do so outside of ports of entry. I think the real question is whether courts are going to be more skeptical of the public use justification in this context, given the baggage, given that the president went to Congress, tried to get money from Congress, got less than what he asked for, and is now trying this end run through the emergency declaration.
Except you're also going to have homeowners similar to Nida Alvarez, who was on CNN's air, who is part of one of the lawsuits, who says in the 40 years that she has owned and lived on her property, which is on the border, she's actually never seen anyone who's illegal who has been crossing. So won't that testimony, establish we don't, meaning those landowners who want to keep their properties, those landowners would say, we don't, see a threat, and we don't want to seize or allow our property to be taken. Won't that also
I think ultimately
be powerful?
That's certainly going to factor into what the courts do in these cases. I think the key, though, is whether taking the property on the whole serves a public use. The Supreme Court, at least historically, Frederica, has been fairly deferential to the government when it comes to asserting a public use. I think the million-dollar question, really the $1.5 billion question in this context, is whether the courts are going to be similarly deferential here, given all of the surrounding politics. Congress passed the Secure Fences Act back in 2006 to deal with at least some parts of the border in the Rio Grande Valley. There's still litigation over some of the eminent domain cases arising out of that statute going on 13 years later. So I think the one thing we can say with confidence is this isn't going to be resolved anytime soon. It's going to take the courts quite a bit of time to sort all of this out.
And the president made it very clear from the Rose Garden that he's rather familiar with the way in which it will play out. This was the president.
We will have a national emergency, and we will then be sued, and they will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there. And we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get a fair shake.
So if you reminded us that, other cases have been in litigation for 13 years, is the president talking about a sequence that could last long like that?
I mean, possibly, Frederica. I think the odds are that these cases, the ones specifically arising out of the national emergency declaration, will move faster, because I think we're going to see plaintiffs in these cases seeking a kind of emergency relief, an injunction. And those cases tend to get from trial courts to circuit courts to the Supreme Court much faster. The one important point to say, I think, in response to the president, though, is the first of the cases that were filed, they haven't all been filed in the Ninth Circuit in California. Actually, one of the most important cases we've seen so far was filed in the president's backyard in Washington. So this isn't going to be about, plaintiffs picking judges who are sympathetic to them. This is going to be about courts across the country confronting the, I think, deeply troubling implications of the president's actions.
All right, all fascinating. Steve Vladeck, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.